How many more workers will lose their jobs because of your economic incompetence?
This is a party without one skerrick of moral compass.
Bitter enemies and aggressive rivals. For Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull, it was kill or be killed. Yet now, if not comrades in arms, they're the most unlikely of frenemies. How has this happened and why? Over 6 decades, Rudd and Turnbull's lives share uncanny similarities. 2 driven, talented men, 2 egos, 2 prime ministers. Men in the mirror. I was Turnbull's chief of staff when he was opposition leader in 2009. I'd already seen Rudd at close hand since 2002. Now you'll hear from intimate colleagues exploring the mirror image of Rudd and Turnbull's lives, and we'll ask where to from here.
Politics is not a destination, it's a journey. And you look at their journey, a lot of similarities. Rudd and Turnbull, and they've landed pretty well in the same spot
He
now.
always used to say...
Kevin Rudd's upbringing would have been a much tougher one than Malcolm Turnbull's, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think their childhoods are defined by the loss of a parent, the loss of parental love.
Lover, when Malcolm was 10, he was sent to boarding school. On a Queensland dairy farm, Rudd was 11 when his father, Bert, died in a car crash, leaving Kevin, his mum and his 3 siblings in poverty.
Rudd talks with a bitterness about his father, Bert Rudd, who he depicts as a drunk, and Rudd basically says he never had the love of his father, which is a very bruising experience for a young man to grow up with. And I've always thought of Kevin, well, his politics then was a search for love. He wanted people to love him to compensate for the love he never got from his father.
Tell us about the impact that Malcolm Turnbull's upbringing would have had on him.
There's no doubt that losing his mum, who left, would have been devastating. I lost my mum at 4. She was 38. You never get over losing your mum. Malcolm's mum left. I don't know how you ever recover from that. And I give him credit for the fact he was able to rebuild. I know he had a very supportive dad. I think the fact that Turnbull was able to rebuild his life from that is a real credit to him. We should never underestimate the loss of a mum on any child.
Does it explain his drive?
It does. It absolutely explains his drive and his self-belief, because it's the only thing you've got. You've got to believe in yourself, because your mum's left or your mum's died. And I think that explains a lot about Malcolm.
I think both of them were brought up in an environment, from my observation of them, where they were told that they were special and that they could achieve anything that they wanted to achieve. And to that extent, both of them had somewhat overindulged childhoods and were not balanced in their characters. And that can be a very, very destabilising thing when they're introduced into what is a team sport, that is politics.
Do people who lose a parent at a young age sometimes spend the rest of their life looking for love from everyone else?
The psychologists would say yes, some of them, not all, of course. I can openly say that it took me 10 years to get over the fact that my dad just died like that, because I actually got along with him well. As I sometimes say to Kevin, we were both the mistakes of the family, you know, so...
No one saw Kevin Rudd's genesis and rise at closer quarters than the man who grew up with him, older brother Greg.
That's me, that's Kevin. I was brought up in the same room as Kevin. But on the wall were sort of posters of empire. He was always fascinated with the rise and fall of empires. How you get authority, how you keep authority, and how to rise through those systems. How do you become a leader? With the absolute 100% belief that if he got there, he would make the world a better place. I'd say Malcolm's similar, very similar, yeah.
Kevin's brother Greg tells us that from an early age he was fascinated by empire.
When you're a kid, you've got to have some things that inspire you. And if it was empire, if it was building something as a kid, sometimes that doesn't mean a lot. It's just that you want to be inspired by something, you're looking for something.
His name's Peter. He's from Queensland, and he's here to help as well. I am happy to be a humble backbencher. As all of you know, I've been humble all my life, and that humility will continue.
Former Queensland Premier Peter Beattie has plenty of admiration for both Turnbull and Rudd.
It is about taking your brilliance, and again, I want to be fair about this. They were both great intellects, and putting it in a way that Australians can understand. And if you can't take people with you on these ideas, the journey's a short one.
I did know his style and character and regarded him as not really being suitable for the position of Liberal leader. He demonstrated no leadership qualities that I could deduce, and I thought he was capable of being very destructive of the Liberal Party.
It really is a disgrace.
Former Liberal Senator Nick Minchin is another who observed both men closely, particularly Malcolm Turnbull. Why do you think he entered politics?
He's one of those types who had an overriding ambition to be Prime Minister of Australia. There's no doubt that he walked in the door expecting to be and wanting to be Prime Minister of Australia sooner rather than later. He has a huge ego and massive ambition, and having achieved all that he did in the business world, the next sort of battlefield to conquer was that of politics. And he, unlike most of us who are rather modest in our ambitions, saw no reason why he shouldn't be Prime Minister of Australia.
He was the Prime Minister who broke this nation's heart.
Both of them have, unjustly, I think, a chip on the shoulder about their intellectual capacity. So not only do they have to be in a room full of clever people, but they have to demonstrate that they are the cleverest in the room. Now, often that's without dispute.
Well, I actually went to the same school as Kevin, Morris Ashgrove, after my father died, and he went there after his father died. So it was something we used to talk about, when he was still a bureaucrat. And I'd have to say, to be fair to him, on his good days, like Malcolm, he can be terribly good company. He can be very amusing and good fun, but can be brutal when he feels he's crossed.
And then there was the personality, famous for his notorious death stare.
Don't record this.
Chris Mitchell and Kevin Rudd once were close. The former PM is godfather to one of Chris's children. Editor of the Courier Mail, then Editor-in-Chief of The Australian, Mitchell gives us an intimate insight.
Politics is about power.
He was sort of a gatekeeper for the Goth government. Famously, taking a line from Confucian tradition, he had his desk raised. He had a platform built in the office, and people who came to see him had a chair lower down on the floor level, so everyone had to look up to him as if he were the emperor.
Is your brother a good man?
We can all look in the mirror and say the same thing. Does he think he's a good person? Yes. Have I seen him out of the light of politics do good things that will never be reported? Have I seen him do that a lot through life? Yes, I have. So to answer that, I'd say look at any leader on no matter what side of politics, any leader who's got to the top, ask the same question and say they're a mix of good, bad and pragmatic necessity.
Could Kevin Rudd just as easily have been a Liberal MP and Malcolm Turnbull vice versa?
Well, Malcolm would fit the modern Labor elitism and politically correct framework. Yeah, Malcolm, who flirted with the Labor Party, probably went 20 or 30 years too early in that regard. He'd fit in lovely now for an inner city seat because all the inner city gentrified mob believe in people like Malcolm.
I think one of the weaknesses of both Turnbull and Rudd is that they're incapable of serious self-reflection. I think they think that they're always right.
Academic and commentator Tom Switzer was speechwriter for Brendan Nelson when he preceded Turnbull as the Liberal leader.
Well, there's no question that neither Rudd nor Turnbull were creatures of their party. They were at odds with the rank-and-file members of both the Labor and the coalition parties. And that helps explain why they were never really accepted by their parties. So to say that the knives eventually came out for Malcolm Turnbull and Kevin Rudd would be wrong. Many people never put the knives away in the first place.
I think a lot of people globally that I've met will use the relevant party as a vehicle for them to execute what they had in their head for a long time. So I guess to answer that, does Kevin hate the people who vote Liberal? Of course he doesn't. They're all Australians. So could he, if the Liberal Party ever allowed him to, could he have ever been on that side of politics? Maybe. I'd say exactly the same with Malcolm, maybe.
The millionaire made his move into politics in 2004, considering Labor in his early years before becoming the Liberal member for Wentworth.
Wentworth is safe in Liberal hands.
Hang on, now guys, just settle down.
You said that everything involving Malcolm Turnbull will end in tears. Why did you think that?
Well, I'd been a student of Malcolm Turnbull for a number of years, so I was very fearful of his leadership and, as you know, had worked hard to prevent him getting the leadership when we lost office in 2007 and had marshalled support for Brendan Nelson. And then I'd witnessed Malcolm spend the whole of 2008 actively undermining and destroying both Brendan personally and his leadership.
I know there are a lot of people out there who would rather I was leading the Liberal Party. It's ridiculous to deny that, you know, pretend that's not happening.
Politics is a tough business, so you always expect it to be tough.
Let's go back to when you were working with Brendan Nelson when he was the opposition leader. How did Malcolm Turnbull treat his own party and his own leader during that period?
Well, Nelson had a tough task because he became the leader after John Howard's downfall. And he had to manage Turnbull, who never accepted the legitimacy of Nelson's victory as opposition leader. So right from the outset, Turnbull tried to undermine Nelson. And Brendan had to cop this almost every day.
People tell me stories, people who worked in the office tell me stories. It was nothing for Turnbull to burst into Brendan Nelson's office, leader of the opposition, leader of the Liberal Party, and basically pointing the finger, you're hopeless, you've done this wrong, you're bloody useless. You know, like, you stuffed up in question. That was bloody hopeless. Why do we ask those questions? Like, to really get stuck into Nelson. Like, leader of the opposition's a tough job, and Turnbull was constantly on his case. It was like a psychological war against poor old Brendan.
When I was working for Nelson in mid-September 2008, Malcolm had given his press statement about being the new Liberal leader. And within an hour, I started getting missed calls from Malcolm Turnbull. And I didn't want to take his call. I wouldn't want to work for him. I wouldn't want to deal with him, particularly given the moment. And eventually his private secretary, Sally Cray, said, "You really need to see Malcolm, he needs to see you." I went into his office, shut the door, and he just blasted me, saying that I was a disgrace, that I was a climate denier, that I was a right-wing ideologue, and that I was going to make, if I had my way, I'd make the Liberal Party browner than John Howard. And I had no place in his team. I said, with all due respect, I don't want to be part of your team.
Why did he call you in to tell you that?
The execution after the revolution. Hey, that's fine. It's his prerogative. I'm pretty thick-skinned about these things. But I saw a very nasty side to Malcolm then. He'd won, but he wanted to rub it in. That's not a good quality in any political leader.
Kevin Rudd has been duly elected leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party.
It was all there in Kim Beazley's face. The disappointment, the hurt, the despair, the loss. The man who had cut him down, Kevin Rudd, accompanied by running mate Julia Gillard.
Did it surprise you how rapidly he was able to get into a political career and become federal leader of the ALP?
Look, Kevin was very good at playing the media. Let's be frank, he was very good at doing that, as poor Kim Beazley knows. I mean, I think Kim Beazley's one of the great people we never had as Prime Minister of this country. And Kevin set about to remove Kim, that's not a secret. He was very good at politics. But it was the politics of moving people on a chessboard. Kevin would be a great chessboard player, a great chess player, no doubt about that. What he missed was the warmth of being able to convince fellow humans, that is his caucus in the cabinet, to stick with him.
So what were the qualities that he had that enabled him to get that far?
Well, he was technocratic. He would claim familiarity with lots of policy areas, and he got Labor into government. I couldn't do that in 2004. I think he learned a lot from the failures of my campaign, as you should learn. But it was always a very artificial arrangement. I used to say to people, look, Kevin Rudd really is in a situation where people who don't know him love him, and that explains the opinion polls, but those who do know him despise him.
When the wheels come off, he's not prepared for the bad news.
This guy was 24/7 self-promotion.
Egotism, strong egotism.
Turnbull didn't think Rudd was up to it.
Get out of my job, get out of my way.
Do they have many close friends?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?